Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Start 2026 Strong, Why Summer is a Smart Time to Upgrade Payroll. My name is Clarissa Zilberman. I'm the Marketing Content Manager here at R365, and I'm excited to be with you today. We'll get started with a few housekeeping items and then get right into the presentation, followed by a Q&A. Please submit any questions by clicking on the question box down below. A link to the webinar recording will be sent to you in the next few days. And if you need any help at any time, you can contact us at marketing@restaurant365.com. I am thrilled to introduce our presenter today, Tyler Kump. Tyler has over 20 years of experience in accounting and payroll system implementations, currently in his 8th year at R365, where he initially led accounting implementations before transitioning to oversee payroll implementations. Prior to R365, he spent 12 years as a Microsoft Dynamics consultant, specializing in business process improvements and software implementations for colleges and universities. His extensive background bridges technical expertise with practical business solutions, helping organizations streamline their financial operations. Okay, let's get this started. Tyler, off to you.
Okay. Hey, thanks so much for the introduction. And let me share this next slide that I have here, just to kind of walk through the agenda, and I'll tell you some of the conversations that I have that maybe weren't part of the introduction that we had. It's something that, in addition to kind of setting up accounting and payroll systems for companies throughout the last 20 or so years, I work really closely with restaurants, and some of my best friends are they own restaurants, and so these are some conversations that they've had with me. And so as we were putting this presentation, this webinar together, I reflected on a lot of the questions and things that some of my friends have asked me as they have been looking to kind of adjust their tech stack or enhance their business and some of those things. So as we put together the agenda, those are some of the things that were top of mind for me. And so some of the things that they ask that I want to kind of address during this webinar today are some of those questions that they had. For example, common payroll headaches. Just kind of say like, what are some of the common headaches that we're just not thinking about that would be good to kind of have on our roadmap or on our radar? And then what matters as far as like payroll solutions, because the landscape is changing. So what should I really be looking for, and what matters, and what's a bell and a whistle? So we'll talk through some of those things. And then as I'm looking for a new software, what are some of like the tips and tricks that I need to be mindful of so that I can be thoughtful in picking kind of a winner? Payroll software in particular is something that can really impact the business more so than maybe the accounting software can. So just being thoughtful on that. People always ask questions on like, well, what are the top operators doing? Like we want to know what others are doing, and I have a little more exposure to maybe a couple of other restaurants, and so I can give some suggestions on that. And then going through implementation timelines, definitely want to touch on that as well. So we're going to touch on all those questions in likely about the next 20, 25 minutes or so, and then leave time for open Q&A. So that's kind of the agenda that we have set so far. One of the things that I did want to share of as far as kind of like why is summer the smart time to think about payroll is I see this mistake come up often, and I don't know if it's necessarily maybe mistake is too strong a word, but generally speaking, people do like to go live with new payroll solutions in January. Doesn't mean that you couldn't go live in February or March, but it does get a little more complicated. But having a fresh start in January that coincides with the new calendar year, where you can close out your books in your old software, process W-2s, and then start in the new software is kind of the ideal state. It's also kind of like with the new year, new software feels really nice, especially for employees, and coming out of, for a lot of restaurants, a busy season with the holidays. But generally speaking, summer is the time to start thinking about that. If the evaluation process only starts in October or November, or we all start closing our books in November, and then all of a sudden we're trying to implement a new payroll software, and we haven't really given a lot of thought to some of these things that will impact our business. A lot of times I think that adds undue stress and unnecessary stress. So some of the things that I kind of mentioned to a lot of my friends in the restaurant industry is, hey, if you're looking to change a payroll software and January is that ideal state for you, then really start considering it in around this time frame, August, September, because what it'll allow you to do is if you sign up for a new software, you decide on the software and you sign up for that software, it gives you a lot more runway to be able to kind of build that foundation, not just for the software, but also to adjust your processes. Sometimes processes need to be adjusted with new software. Also allows you to kind of, again, approach things where you have enough time to do some testing during some busy time, and then really sets you up perfectly for that January start, which helps set you up with kind of a you're confident in your year-end reporting and that like it's in your old system but not your new system. You're starting off with a clean, fresh set of books, and that you have something to really kind of start the new year with. So that's kind of some of the main things that I try to share with people is give yourself some time and some space. This likely isn't something that you will just be able to make a decision and then accomplish within like a month. Not saying that it hasn't been done, but it'll be a lot less stressful if you give yourself a little more runway from which to work. Want to start off a little bit here with a polling question. I know I have my opinions on what some of the common pain points are, and we'll open that up to everybody here now.
You should see that poll on your screen, so I'll give you just another minute here to answer. Thanks.
Okay, we had quite a few quite a few answers there. Just to share some of the results of the polls. Um, these are things that are common pain points that I've heard, but the results of the polls really focus on manual entry across multiple platforms. We hear that quite a bit. And then limited support. When we do run into challenges, it's those urgent issues that you want to have the confidence that you have the support to be able to resolve those issues, especially something that's timely like payroll. So those are two big ones. And then wage calculations and tax filing uncertainties, we had a few votes in both of those. Those should go without saying that you want to make sure that your payroll software calculates payroll correctly. But in some platforms and depending on kind of where you're at, just making sure that those taxes are calculated correctly, wages calculated correctly, very important as well. Um, I think if I were to sum it up, some of the big common pain points that people have is can I process payroll quickly and can I process payroll accurately? Accuracy, of course, like it takes precedent over quickly, but especially as businesses evolve and grow, it should be one of those things where we're able to kind of validate that the information is correct and then process payroll quickly. And that's what people are really kind of after and shooting for. It goes right in line with some of the things that we wrote down for what really matters in a payroll solution today. And some of the things you might have touched on where manual entry is a huge pain point. So automation is really something that people are looking for and can really make a difference in their business, especially restaurants where time is limited. And the last thing somebody wants to do is be in front of a computer when there are urgent things that need to be done on the floor in a business, especially in the restaurant industry there. So automation with the wage rates. I've had some friends that in their business, one of the pain points that they have is they have a point of sale and then everybody clocks into the point of sale. So that's great. Like it works for their employees, but then the process to be able to extract that information from the point of sale, validate it, check that information, upload the information into payroll, validate again that it was uploaded correctly, it ends up taking 1 or 2 days with 2 or 3 people full time. And this is not a huge restaurant group. It's not a huge group. And, talking to my friend that owns this restaurant, he kind of says, man, I would love to expand my business, but some of the things that keep me up at night are things like payroll. Is it going to take me 6 people and 3 days to process payroll? Do we have to have different cadences as far as like how we process payroll? And for me, if you have the right software and you have the right automations, then that problem is solved without having to kind of think outside the box and do some things that may not be the best employee experience or the best experience for you as an owner of a restaurant. Some of the key things there, as far as automations, it's really easy to say that word. I think some of the things that I mentioned that people should really kind of take a look for as you look for a solution for kind of like a payroll solution would be streamlined data flow. So if you have people that are clocking into the point of sale, for example, how does that information then flow into not just payroll, but then also something that sometimes gets overlooked is the payroll journal entry. So sometimes I think the accountants and those that are doing the bookkeeping, they feel overlooked when it comes to payroll. Like first priority, of course, is getting people paid and paid correctly. But then how do we record that so that it appears on the profit and loss statement correctly? And that's something that um, I think is something easy to overlook, but is something that is important. Just something that, again, I like the word streamlined or automated, something that would help with that process. Get the information in, then get the information to the end result, which would be your accounting system so that you could reconcile and have accurate profit and loss statements. Something that I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier too is proper support. If something goes wrong, and with payroll, hopefully it doesn't happen often, but typically when those things go wrong, it's urgent because payroll has deadlines that are very different than maybe vendor payments or vendor invoices or other things there. Like people's pay is on the line, and there's a lot of emotions with that, so it's very high stake. Having a question that I would always ask that, or would recommend to my friends is what kind of support can I expect for payroll? And there might be different answers, but I think being very direct and just kind of asking that of will I have a dedicated rep? Will I have somebody whose name I know that I can reach out to and talk to? That's something that I think is important. Just because if there is somebody that's a dedicated rep, and this is why I kind of feel strongly about this, if you have the person's name, one, they're going to be more intimately, they're going to have that more intimate knowledge in your business. But then there's also kind of like a feeling of they care. They know who you are. They'll get to know you kind of over time. And it's something where your business is their business. And I just like that kind of old school approach. There are some payroll softwares that do offer this. There's others that don't. Everybody kind of makes their own decision. For me personally, that's something that carries a lot of weight and value that I always kind of recommend. I think the other thing is ease of use. Um, there's a lot of bells and whistles out there. And I think when we think ease of use, I always think of the payroll operator, whoever the payroll manager is that's processing payroll. But when I think of payroll, a lot of teams have to come together. I'll share one quick story. I was working with a group, this is a couple of years back, and they had their processes were pretty solid. You know, they had their director of operations and their general managers that were reviewing time and approving time as they should because they were the ones in the restaurant. And then they had a payroll manager that was in a corporate office that was processing payroll. So maybe not an unusual story in most cases. The challenge is that the reporting and the ease of use for the operators and those that were actually in the restaurant was really difficult. It was difficult to review time and do that consistently, especially with all the other responsibilities that were there. As a result, it was difficult. There were a lot of errors, clerical errors, which created more time for the payroll managers, which made it feel like there weren't as many automations and things that we had in the system. So I think that was something that really stood out to me. The other thing was ease of use for, when I say everyone, like employees. Sometimes employees like to, they move quite a bit. So how easy is it for them to kind of submit an address change? Or how easy is it for them to submit maybe a tax form change or something along those lines? Um, Empowering our employees to be able to do more, where it's an ease of use, where they're able to kind of see that information. Probably the most common thing I think we hear is, I want my most recent check stub or pay stub. Being able to kind of access that information, I think, is something that is important. Ease of use, not just for the payroll manager, but then for everyone, from the GM down to the end employee. And that final thing here is a built-in compliance confidence. Um, Luckily, I don't have too many stories of this, but I have heard the stories where Somebody felt that the software was compliant as far as the rules and labor rules and things that should be abided by, only to be audited and find out that they weren't compliant. It's a very expensive nightmare, and that's something that we definitely want to avoid. Restaurants in particular are more difficult than your typical business. There's a few more rules that we have in place depending on where you're located and what states, but just in general, restaurants are more complicated. So making sure that you have confidence that the software is compliant so that if you did get audited, that everything would be okay on that front, and that you have that confidence that you can sleep well at night. I'll share a couple of things that we've heard from others. So as people go through implementation at Restaurant 365, we ask them a lot of questions on after the experience, like, well, if you knew then what you know now, what would you do differently? And these are some of the things that some folks have shared. And again, this is paraphrasing a little bit. One that I heard was, we'll do it later. And so there's missed windows, missed opportunities. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in the presentation where we talked about how sometimes people had the intention of going live in January. So they started the process of looking at software in maybe June, July, August, but the urgency really wasn't felt. And then by the time the contract was signed, it was late October, early November, right during the holiday season. And to focus on changing a payroll software right in the heart of some of the busiest times for some of these restaurants made it really difficult and kind of unnecessarily stressful. I think the results of that were some people did go live in January, had that clean cut over, but man, a little more stressful than maybe they would have liked. Others delayed and then went live in late January, February, which is possible. So for those that are thinking, man, can I only go live at the beginning of a year? Not the case. We can, but it does. There are a couple of additional moving parts that at that point it isn't as clean. I'll use one example, um, and I'll share with you kind of like a very personal example. I worked for a company that they switched their payroll software. They did it mid-season. Again, that's something that again is possible, but some of those additional moving parts that you don't have with January go lives are who processes your W-2s. And it happened to be that wasn't something that was discussed with either the old payroll solution or the new payroll solution. So year end arrived, and both companies submitted W-2s. The first company through the first part of the year, the second company for the entire year, because they pulled in that historical payroll information for the current year. Unbeknownst to me, I'm just the end user. I'm just the employee. Um, uh, I and all the other employees got letters from the IRS asking why we didn't pay enough taxes because both payroll softwares submitted that paperwork. It seemed like I made a lot more money than I did. And so it created a lot of headache, a lot of anxiety. You can imagine how frustrated people were. Frustrated, it might be an understatement with some of the employees, but it was an easy mistake to make. It was something where it was just that clarification that was a moving part. So again, for those that do process payroll post January and throughout the year, those are some key questions that we would ask, but they're just additional things that we would want to be mindful of. So if January is some of the kind of like that target date where it is a cleaner cutover date, we just want to give ourselves a little bit of time. We kind of touched on the timeline there, but also thinking all providers file taxes the same way, just making sure that we have a good understanding of that. And again, just making sure that we understand if we do switch over kind of a mid-year or during the year, who's filing what taxes, just making sure that we have clarification on that. Something that I'll kind of mention, and I mention it to my restaurant friends quite a bit as well, is asking about restaurant specific needs. You know your business well, but something that I'm always amazed at is how those that don't work in the restaurant industry, how little they know or the expectations that they have without really thinking through things through clearly. So multiple pay rates. How often is it to have people that work multiple jobs in a restaurant? In other like a standard business, you might have somebody that has one role, one job, one pay rate. Simple. Sounds awesome. But that's something that sometimes gets overlooked. Overtime nuances. I have somebody that works two jobs with multiple pay rates. Now they qualify for overtime. can the person articulate how they would handle overtime in that situation? That's a really common restaurant issue. So that would be something that I'd be kind of looking to make sure that they understand, especially when you get somebody in place so they understand kind of what that weighted average overtime is. Um, how do they handle labor rules, for example, especially maybe with minors, where we have some restaurants where we have minors that can work for certain periods of times or certain windows, but maybe not others. Um, we mentioned support, and again, I don't mean to kind of um, just continue to talk about the same topic, and just kind of, but just making sure that you understand kind of what that onboarding and support looks like, making sure that there's a timeline and a path and a project plan in place to help you be successful. And then the final thing that I'll put down for the evaluation mistake is in truth, if you're mindful and you're thoughtful upfront with the questions during the evaluation process, it doesn't have to be painful. There are plenty of painful stories out there. There's a lot of people that'll say, man, I'm never switching softwares again because of how painful it was. But truly, modern setups, they're streamlined and they're less disruptive if you find the right partner. So that's something that wanted to kind of really point out. Let me share with you this next slide that we have here. This is just what, from my observation, what top operators do differently. So a lot of times, my restaurant friends, I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the call, I have a lot of exposure to a lot of restaurants and see some things that are done really well, some things that there are opportunities to improve. And from a payroll perspective, these are the things. And again, you're probably noticing a couple of different themes here. One is the evaluation starts early. This is a big decision. It can be a high impact decision. So start early, give yourself enough time, make sure you understand kind of like what your year end would look like and your peaks and your peak seasons. Plan for 2 to 4 months out. You know your staff and you know your capacity and also those that may be averse to change. So give yourself enough time. And then the final thing here that I would say is the top operators, and this isn't in evaluating a software, but I think it goes hand in hand, is using payroll as a lever, not just a necessity. And let me give you kind of a specific example there, because sometimes people will be like, I have no idea what that means. It sounds nice, but what does it even mean? Um, there are softwares out there, for example, that uh, maybe paying out tips on a daily basis through cash tips is something that is difficult or pretty time intensive or labor intensive. Um, there are payroll softwares out there that would pay out the tips on a daily basis, but do it through kind of a digital way instead of cash basis, which allows you to calculate taxes, for example, and be able to kind of do things like that. So being able to kind of leverage some of those different pieces there to help improve retention, reduce some of the errors and things in place there. So being able to kind of identify some of those different pieces there. Okay, so here's a couple of things here. If you are considering a change, sometimes when I go through that and say, hey, be mindful of the questions that you should ask, the very next question people ask is, well, I would love to be mindful of the questions, but I don't know the questions. So, what should be some of the questions that I should ask, as I start evaluating softwares? First one would be, is it built for restaurants? So is there a payroll software that truly understands the restaurant industry and is built for restaurants, where they understand the nuances and it's designed specifically to handle multi-location setups and multi-pay rates? So there might not be some out there that say like, oh yeah, we're built for restaurants, but that specific question, I would say multi-locations, multi-pay rates. You could dig in even further and ask them about overtime. The other is streamlined data flow. That poll that we took at the beginning, vast majority, it's the manual entry across multiple platforms. So what can be done to streamline that data flow from the point of sale, if that's what you're using for time and attendance, to processing payroll, to getting that information through to the bank rec, or all the way through in accounting, all the way through the bank reconciliation process. The other is compliance support. Let somebody else think about compliance, not you. Rest easy at night that somebody's thinking through those things. And we also kind of mentioned just general support. I think that's something that's important. And then cross-location coverage. So cross EIN tracking, reporting for ACA purposes, that kind of goes right alongside compliance. So if you're to take a screenshot of anything here and take away anything from this presentation, this webinar, I think it'd be these questions. That's what I would want my friends and family to kind of take away. Here's a couple of things just to kind of touch on buying now versus later. So right now it's still summertime. Feels like the beginning of the year is still a long ways away, although it does feel like it should be March or February still in some ways for me. But if it were me, I would say the summer purchase plan that would be safe would be you sign in August, and then September and October you could do parallel testing. Let's make sure that we get the right data into the system. We've identified how our processes, like if I were a restaurant, how my processes would fit with this new software. What are we not thinking? What kind of changes are we expecting? Are we realizing the value that we think we will? Of course, there will be a learning curve with all of this, but is it solving some of the pain points that you're looking for? And then January 1st, you have a clean start. I kind of mentioned that messy story that impacted me. Fall, winter does have those purchase risks where if you do kind of push that into kind of a later time frame, not that it's not possible, but there's just more moving parts that need to be considered. Okay, so here's some key takeaways. Um, why evaluate and act now? Touched on the secure clean slate for January. If we wait until quarter form, our options narrow and January starts may not be possible. It just means that that would be delayed a couple of months. So that's something to kind of take into consideration. Um, there is some cost of inaction, so that if you are with a software where you are concerned about compliance related issues or tax filing uncertainties, those don't go away. Typically, payroll softwares don't improve that quickly in just a couple of months. And so that's something to kind of take into account. And then summer gives you a chance to kind of evaluate multiple options and do so calmly, be able to kind of talk through things correctly, test in parallel in the fall, avoid any surprises. So that's kind of the main thing that we have there. Going to open it up to another poll question here. So let me share that here with you, and we'll kind of go to this step. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds here. Excellent. I appreciate you filling out that poll question. One of the key things from a webinar that I always like is a Q&A session. So we'll open it up to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Tyler. We really appreciate it. We can get started here with a couple questions. So I'll start with the first one. Who on our team would need to be part of the onboarding?
Yeah, great question on that side. And every organization is going to look a little bit different. But what I would share is whoever is processing your payroll is probably going to be the one that's most heavily involved. However, they shouldn't be the only person involved. When you think about your process, for example, I like to think of it A to Z. So, for example, um, how we capture time, if that isn't changing in the point of sale, for example, then may not be the end employees. But if we're switching out the time and attendance piece, at some point we want the employees to be involved, albeit probably later on in the stage. If you have your general managers that are responsible for reviewing time and approving time, and then whatever that process looks like to get that information over to whomever is processing payroll, they'd want to be involved in the process as well, just to make sure that all of the pieces in your process fit into how this software will work. Doesn't mean that they should be involved through every single step of the way and all of those different processes, but that's the way I would approach like who on the team would need to be a part of onboarding. Somebody that I think gets overlooked quite a bit, and we mentioned this before, is the accounting side. So once payroll is processed, sometimes I think that's a common mistake that people make is they do a great job of okay capturing the time. How do we get the time to payroll? Payroll's processed, we're good. But there is that final step of how does it get recorded on your profit and loss statement? And so involving if there is a separate person that's processing the accounting functions of your software, making sure that they're aligned with what that looks like as well.
Great. Next question. We've had issues in the past with payroll not matching up with our general ledger. How does your system avoid that?
Yeah, I do like this question in particular, where a big part of Restaurant 365, and I imagine a lot of those that are part of this webinar use Restaurant 365 in some capacity or other. Being able to have an integration from the point of sale, assuming that's where you get your time and attendance from or not, is really helpful because we have an idea of what your job titles are. And if you map those job titles to specific GL accounts, that's helpful when we go to map your payroll, the actual payroll that's processed, to those same GL accounts. So it just kind of provides what I would say harmony between sometimes what are different, disparate, or separate systems. Our system in particular, just to kind of answer the question directly, is we do try to automate that journal entry. And so we have an idea of what the chart of accounts are, what the different job titles are mapped as far as kind of to what GL account, which helps us have more accurate payroll GLs.
Great. What can we do to prepare our employees for a payroll switch?
I think understanding who your employees are and know that there might be some anxiety around that. Uh, I think some people just get anxious with change in general, but this can be a really exciting thing. Some things that I've seen that I've really liked from some companies is they highlight the advantages that will come with using this new software. So, for example, it could be something as simple as an app or something along those lines that can be really powerful, where you can say, "Hey, today you have to go to your manager to check your check stub," or something like that. I mean, it goes across the board, but just being able to highlight some very specific values that in the software that you are purchasing has made a big difference to get them excited, and then also give them something to kind of play a part in this whole process. Not saying it should be for every single organization, but I have seen where one person had everybody validate and verify that they had the correct addresses for the employees. So it kind of made them a part of the process, so to speak. Got them in the app. It got them kind of thinking through this and as participants rather than um, just being acted upon, but they were actually part of the action.
How long does it take to switch over? What's involved in the process?
Oh man, uh, it's we kind of mentioned in the webinar to plan for between 2 to 4 months. It can be done. If you have an organization that is maybe just a handful of employees and is pretty simple, where everybody's salaried, that could probably go a little bit faster. But I would say the time that it takes, ballpark, is directly correlated to how complicated some of your kind of your payroll processing is or your organization. If you have multiple concepts and multiple pay rates, that's something that we'd probably want to build a little more time into. But if someone were to say, hey, just give me a ballpark, 2 to 4 months.
Great. And last question here, what kind of support do we get during onboarding and after we're live?
I can't speak to every organization out there, but at Restaurant 365, we do have a named individual that will help kind of be your point of contact through implementation, specifically um, the payroll portion. So that's something that we have. And then after live, we kind of touch base on that. At Restaurant 365, we do have kind of like a named individual and then also a phone number that you can call. So when you are in a pinch and it says high urgent situations, those are things that we value.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Tyler, for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And now a quick note before we sign off here. We wanted to let you know that the restaurant transformation tour schedule is live. Before the end of the year, we'll be making stops in San Diego and New York. These events will feature sessions tailored to different roles in the restaurant industry, offering valuable insights and the chance to connect with peers. Hope to see you there. And this now concludes our webinar. You'll receive an email with a link to download the recording, to listen again, or share with your colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.